Il va parler en français, and Dr. Miller, a little bit of both, right? Okay? So, first of all, thank you all for showing up tonight. For those who know me well, education is my passion, okay? I have my Hebrew school, I have my kids, I love education. But what I realized through education, through educating either my kids or myself or my Hebrew school or my teaching experience, I realized that the people responsible for education, if they're not taking care of their mental health, and if they're not aware, and if they're not educated, if they're not empowered, if they don't have that awareness, they cannot be good educators. So my second passion is mental health, and I really believe that the solution, the problems of today is education and a lack of mental health, and the solution is a better education and working on our mental health. So if you all showed up tonight, that means you all agree with me. That means it's as important for you, whether it's for yourself, whether it's for people you know, whether it's even if you don't know anyone, even if you feel like it's very far from you, just know it could happen to anyone. It's in our surroundings, and the more you're open and educated, I feel like the more you remove that stigma, I don't know what you want to call it, but that kind of negative image that people have around mental health, which should not exist. The more we educate, the more we are aware about it, the less it's going to feel scary. I teach Tanya every Monday, and the pasuk, for my students who know, the main phrase in Tanya that the whole Tanya is based on is Kikarov elecha hadavar me'od beficha uvevavcha lasoto. It is very close to you, in your mouth, in your heart, your feelings, and to do it now. What is it talking about? Spiritual health, being connected to Hashem, being connected to God is very attainable, very reachable in your thought, speech, and action. Okay, and the whole Tanya is based on that. Spiritual health, the Torah teaches us, and mental health works together. Okay, when you have a good connection, when you work on your thought, your speech, and your action, it's hand in hand with mental health and spiritual health, and it's very attainable. Okay, someone who is suffering in pain, they feel like it's so far they will never get out of it, but the Tanya tells us it's attainable for anyone, whatever kind of pain you're feeling. It's there, it's attainable. You have to believe in it, and I'll leave the tips and all the knowledge to the professional, but I just want to end off with thanking you guys again for showing up, and the importance that it is for showing up. And the way the program is going to work is my husband's going to talk after me, then Dr. Miller. During the talk, jot down questions. If you don't feel comfortable asking the questions at the end, you can even send me on WhatsApp, but write down your questions, because after Dr. Miller's going to talk, we're going to have like a question answer session so we can understand better. So I'm going to call up my husband, Rabbi Zalman, to come and talk. Yeah, you need a book?
Bonsoir à tous, j'ai oublié mes notes. Bonsoir à tous, d'abord un grand plaisir de vous voir, et comme le docteur m'a fait remarquer, il a dit waouh, a nice crowd, il y a beaucoup de monde qui sont là ce soir et c'est magnifique. J'espère que si on est capable d'apprendre même une chose, une leçon, ça suffit. Combien de fois on passe 1 heure, 2 heures à faire des choses qui nous emmènent 0 leçon, et là ce soir on a l'occasion d'apprendre, et j'espère qu'on va apprendre plus qu'une leçon. Alors j'aimerais remercier énormément le docteur Sidney Miller, à savoir que j'ai beaucoup de monde qui ont vu l'annonce, des fois des gens qui n'ont pas pu venir aussi de Montréal. Ils m'ont dit, docteur Sidney Miller, il vient au Chabad de Brossard. Je dis ouais, ils ont dit waouh, comment tu as fait? How did you do? Anyway, it's my wife that manage that, but il faut réaliser que c'est une grande chance d'avoir un personnage comme le docteur Sidney Miller. J'aimerais aussi mentionner qu'on est cette année dans l'année du Hakel, c'est le rassemblement. Et on n'en a pas parlé beaucoup ici au Chabad, encore du rassemblement. J'espère que durant l'année, on va en parler beaucoup. Il faut savoir que durant cette année, donc jusqu'à Rosh Hashanah, à chaque fois qu'on a l'occasion de se rencontrer, c'est une bonne chose. Ça fait partie du thème de Hakel. Alors, c'est bon? Parce que quand tu parlais, moi j'étais assis.
Il a raison.
Je veux pas, moi, parler comme ça. Bon, ça va. C'est sa soirée, elle fait ce qu'elle veut. Ok. Bon, alors, moi, j'ai pas fait énormément pour ce soir, mais on m'a donné un rôle. C'est d'introduire un petit peu la soirée avec un thème qui est la vision du rabbi de Lubavitch. Pardon? Toi aussi, tu commences?
Non.
La vision du rabbi de Lubavitch sur la santé mentale. Ça, c'est juste une introduction. Alors, j'imagine, ça c'est un thème en soi, c'est une conférence en soi, mais on m'a demandé d'introduire. Pire que ça, une personne me remet un livre comme ça, elle me dit vas-y, prépare ton introduction de 2 minutes.
C'est quel livre?
Alors, un livre qui s'appelle Health and in Body, Mind and Spirit, c'est justement tous les enseignements du rabbi sur la santé mentale. Mais alors, tu vois, pour préparer en 5 minutes, il faut que je lise tout ça. Impossible. Alors, devinez ce que j'ai fait.
Tu l'as donné à Bella.
Non, mieux que ça. J'ai juste lu l'arrière du livre et ça m'a donné toute la réponse. Je vais vous lire ensemble. Et je vais vous lire ensemble une lettre du rabbi qui est imprimée à l'arrière de ce livre. C'est en anglais. Je vais la lire et la traduire. Je vais la dire en français. Allez. Il dit, puisque tout le monde est humain, ce n'est pas rare qu'une personne, elle, relapse, qu'elle retourne dans son problème mental. Donc en fait, ça c'est la réponse du rabbi à une personne qui lui a envoyé une lettre. On ne connaît pas la lettre, mais on peut imaginer la lettre par rapport à la réponse. C'est donc une personne qui avait des difficultés mentales, etc., qui envoie au rabbi et qui lui dit qu'il rechute, etc. Et le rabbi lui dit comme ça, comme c'est écrit dans le Tanya, donc le rabbi ramène déjà le Tanya pour... Le rabbi ramène le Tanya comme genre antidote. C'est que moi je suis enseignant, alors quand quelqu'un il parle beaucoup dans la classe, je m'approche de lui et je lui parle qu'à lui. Alors le Tanya, et le rabbi ramène le Tanya, et il dit que, et dans d'autres sources, que quand on rechute, c'est en vérité le Yetzer Hara. Alors je sais que Sternal me parlait cette semaine, que dans le Tanya, elle enseigne le cours de le Tanya pour les femmes, et qu'en vérité le Tanya il dit tout ce qui est dépression, santé mentale et tout, en fait c'est le Yetzer Hara. Et c'est une vision comme ça que j'ai appris cette semaine. Et je vois que le rabbi, c'est bien sûr dans la lettre du rabbi qui le dit. Et le rabbi il souhaite que, avant même que la personne elle voit cette lettre, qu'elle s'est déjà remise en bon état. Et alors là, c'est le dernier paragraphe magnifique où le rabbi dit c'est pas parce que je t'ai dit ça que le fait d'avoir un problème mental, ça vient du Yetzer Hara, qu'il ne faut pas en parler. Mais au contraire, le rabbi ramène un passage dans le Talmud, c'est dans le traité de Sota, qui dit tu vois, alors, oui, quand quelqu'un, Dehaga Belev Ish, voilà, ça m'est revenu, Dehaga Belev Ish, une personne qui a un stress, qui a une angoisse, Yesichena, il va en parler à quelqu'un d'autre. Et quand j'ai lu ça, je me suis dit, c'est exactement ce qu'on essaye de faire ici, à la rive sud, Brossard, et tout le thème de cette soirée. C'est qu'en vérité, bon, on a chacun les hauts et les bas, et bien sûr, on est aussi tous des lumières qui sont là pour aussi aider notre entourage. Et une des choses que le rabbi nous dit très important, c'est d'être capable d'avoir quelqu'un avec qui on peut parler. En d'autres termes, le sens de la communauté. Le pire pour une personne, c'est d'avoir une difficulté quelconque et ne pas avoir à qui parler. Ça, c'est le pire. Alors qu'être capable de parler, le rabbi dit déjà ça, itself already a relief. Rien que de parler, c'est déjà une libération du problème. Donc, voilà, j'ai envie de dire, on est heureux ici de savoir qu'on est là un pour l'autre et que si qui que ce soit entre nous ou quelqu'un qui nous connaît, qui a quelque chose, qui passe un moment difficile, il doit savoir que nous, on est ouverts, qu'il peut prendre le téléphone, nous appeler, on va pas juger, on va pas commencer à argumenter, c'est juste on est là pour écouter. Et rien d'écouter. Déjà, ça va être une partie du relief, de la guérison. Bon, je crois que j'ai beaucoup dit. Je vais juste répéter ce que Sterna a dit. S'il y a des questions, vous pouvez toujours envoyer sur WhatsApp à Sterna ou à moi. Et après, on fera une petite session de questions. Sur ce, je vais maintenant donner la parole à notre docteur Sidney Miller. Bevakasha.
So I want to thank you for actually inviting me. It's nice to have the crowd, but I'm actually just happy to be here myself. I speak quite regularly, but I rarely get the opportunity to speak about mental health and also speak about my journey to Chabad. And they're actually quite intertwined in various ways, so hopefully I'll make that a little clear. So I thank you for the opportunity to actually share my story, as well as hopefully give you some mental health tips, okay? I will speak primarily in English. My French is very good, but it's not that good. But if you have any questions or something I'm saying is not clear, I'm happy to repeat it in French to the best of my ability. I do therapy in French, so I must know a couple of words. But primarily I'll be talking in English tonight. So I was sort of tasked to do two things, and one of them was to give some mental health tips. And that's extremely important. It's always been important, but since COVID, it's been incredibly important. Because we already knew that about a third of the population suffers from anxiety at any one time. About a fifth of the population suffers from depression. Everybody suffers from stress. And all these things have escalated enormously since COVID. I think the prescriptions for antidepressants have tripled since the beginning of COVID. My practice, every psychologist I know's practice has exploded. There's long waiting lists, not for me because I work 1,000 hours a week, but literally when people ask me, what are your hours? I say 7 a.m. to midnight, Monday to Thursday, and then 7 to whatever time Shabbat comes in, right? And those are the hours. The demand is there and the need is there. There's a lot of people suffering. And we haven't even seen the end of it yet. In fact, it's only going to get worse. Because when people go through a traumatic, difficult period like COVID has been, for some people who are already anxious and depressed and stressed and not coping and couple problems and family problems, they just got way worse. But there was a whole strata of people, a whole layer of people who probably without COVID could have gone on for quite a while pretty decently, but COVID tipped them over the edge. And then all the rest of us, well, that boat, that water floats up everybody, and so all of us suffer more. Divorces are up, people are blowing up their careers to try something else. They don't know where they're going, they don't know what they're doing. And so it's actually a big task to try and give over something that actually might make a difference. Because I'd like people to leave here tonight with something that makes a difference for them, okay? And in this regard, I'm very much helped by the Tanya, which you introduced before, and which people I'm sure know is the magnum opus of the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad Hasidus. The reason I say this, and I didn't know this at the time when I was studying, is I remember reading in the introduction, here was the story. This rabbi was obviously a big, wise genius, Torah scholar, and also personal knowledge. And people used to go to him. They used to go for private audiences. And as his reputation grew, more and more people came to him. And at some point it became clear he couldn't actually see everybody anymore. He couldn't really see many people anymore. And so he wrote a book, Tanya, and said, you don't need to come to see me, it's all in the book. Which is kind of strange, because if I'm having marital problems of a particular type and I want to go to see the Alter Rebbe for his advice, how am I going to find that in a book? My wife's not in the book, I'm not in the book, our particular problem's not in the book. And if you think of all the mental health problems possible out there, or the spiritual problems, which is what the Alter Rebbe dealt with, but they're totally interconnected, how am I going to find my answers in this book? How can you write one book? I could write one book for every one of my patients. How do you write one book that everybody can use for their spiritual health? So the Alter Rebbe wanted to explain that what I'm doing is I'm actually giving you the tools. I'm giving you a roadmap. You have your spiritual problem, you read the Tanya, it will tell you step by step by step how to get through your issues. And I remember reading this way back when, before I even had any interest in Chabad or Orthodox Judaism or anything. And I remember thinking, this is kind of interesting. This is like the first psychology book. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some tools that you will then be able to apply to any problem you might find yourself in, or your partner, or your child, or your parent. Okay? So there'll be basic tips. I don't have a lot of time, but they will be tips, and in that same notion, not that I'm comparing myself to the Alter Rebbe by any means, but there are ways that you can approach mental health that will allow you to have a roadmap and a guide to get from unhealthy places to very healthy places. And actually, in my therapy practice, when I explain to people what we're going to do, they go, well, that's ridiculously simple. And I go, yeah, it is a ridiculously simple concept. The application is a little more challenging, but you'll see how simple it is. Okay? I also been asked to sort of interweave a little bit of my own personal history in this, which I will try to do as we go along, but I'd like to try and start with, well, maybe I should start with that actually a bit. So my practice is based on something called cognitive behavior therapy, which is this foundational type of work. It's probably the most effective therapy approach out there, certainly for anxiety and depression and stress, which is pretty much everything. It really is the approach you should take. If you ever need to see a therapist, I would strongly recommend you ask them if they do cognitive behavior therapy or some of its offshoots. Mindfulness is an offshoot of cognitive behavior therapy as well. That's also popular these days also. What does cognitive behavior therapy say? Cognitive behavior says that when I experience an emotion, the reason I'm experiencing that emotion is because I've had a thought. That no emotion exists without me thinking about it first. I'll give you a simple example. If tonight, as a kind gesture for talking to you, someone gave me a ticket to fly to Israel, I would be very happy. For two reasons. I got to go to Israel, and also my daughter, who's actually a big part of my personal journey, and her mother's, is actually studying in Yerushalayim in Mayanot, which is a Chabad seminary in Jerusalem. She's there. She's been there since September, so it would be wonderful to be able to go visit her. Unless, of course, I had a fear of flying. Okay? So if I get this ticket, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is so wonderful, I get to travel, great. But if I have a fear of flying, now I'm stuck with a dilemma. Someone's giving me a ticket, I don't really want to use it. But my daughter's in Israel, I should go visit her. They spend all this money buying me a ticket. But actually, the gift creates a huge anxiety in me because I'm afraid to fly. It's a simple example. I'll give you another one. Let's say tomorrow I wake up and I have a stomachache. And I think to myself, oh my God, what if it's the C word? Well, of course, I'm going to be very nervous and anxious, right? In fact, it even happened to me this week. I had a bit of a cold, I was coughing up some phlegm, and all of a sudden the phlegm came out and it was red. And I said, oh my God, I'm coughing up blood. It turns out that my tooth was sore and my gum was bleeding, and the combination of the two created this. But in that moment, my interpretation of what was happening was something serious. So if I wake up tomorrow morning with a stomachache and I think it's something serious, I'm going to be very frightened. Unless I think I ate that tuna in the fridge, I should not have eaten that tuna. Right? That tuna was old. So every emotion that we have comes about because of how we interpret events. And I'll explain to you how you can use this to deal with any type of problem you come across. In the Tanya, it also says, and this is a fundamental notion of Hasidus, particularly Chabad Hasidus, that the mind always has to have control over the heart. What that means in terms of mental health is your rational self always has to have control over your emotional self. We as human beings, we have two types of selves in there, and they compete, they battle inside all the time. It's not two separate beings, but it is two separate sides of me. I have the rational self, that's the one that looks logically, sees what the data is, examines the evidence. And then I have the emotional side, which has nothing to do with facts. It has to do with feelings. And those, of course, is my fears, my worries. That can be joy as well. That's not logical necessarily either. but we don't worry about being a little too joyful. But anxiety, depression, stress, all of that evolves out of a perception of things being bad when we know they typically are not. So our emotional self is what causes our emotional problems, and our rational self is where we can find the solution. It's a little more complicated than that, but for the purposes of this talk, it can be a very effective tool. Okay? So I love cognitive behavior therapy because it works. It appeals to me as well, to my scientific brain, which is how I was trained, but it also appeals to me because I don't like to waste people's time or money, and it's extremely effective very quickly. And so I find it a great tool, and like the Tanya, which has become such a book that people even outside of the Chabad world read it and analyze it and study it. CBT has reached that level of understanding in the mental health world such that it really is the only approach you should be undertaking. The other thing that's important to me is acceptance. I don't mean acceptance of problems I can fix, I mean acceptance of people. So one of the things you should always look for, by the way, when you find a therapist is this person relatable? Do they care about me? Are they judging me? Are they sympathetic to me? Are they listening to me? That was a big part of my journey actually into Chabad. So I'll segue out of there and I'll come back in a second. I grew up, I mean, for 30 years of my life, I didn't look anything like this. In fact, I look in the mirror sometimes and I go, who's that guy? Okay? But for the first 20 years of my life, I grew up in a very, what they call Litvish home, which is Orthodox, but a very different philosophy of Judaism than Chabad. It's very strict, it's very judgy, and I was a pretty rebellious teen and young adult, even when I was in yeshiva, and it didn't really suit very well, and so at 20 years old, I rebelled, and I threw away everything. Actually, I'm not proud of this to say, but I don't think I put on tefillin for 30 years. Till I was bar mitzvah, till the age of 20, I put them on every day, and then I don't think I put them on once for 30 years. Why? I didn't want all the rules, I didn't want all the judgment, I didn't want people always looking at me and telling me how I was being wrong, and so I just threw it all away. Chabad brought me back because of one actually very fundamental concept, which is in the Tanya, but which also our Rebbe was profoundly sought as important, and that was and is that no Jew is better than any other Jew. In the Tanya it says that every Jewish person has a piece of God in them. It's your godly soul. It's literally a piece of God. So if you think about it, if every Jew, that means everybody here, religious or not, Rebbe hated those words. He hated orthodoxy and conservatism and reform. He hated all that stuff. He said a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. It makes absolutely no difference. If you think about it, every Jew is born with an aspect of God in them, actually literally a piece of God in them. How could anybody be better than anybody else? So I do more commandments than you do? So what? They're beautiful. They're gifts from God. They're a way that we connect to Him. But they don't make us better. There's no one better. So I spent 30 years being told by my family and extended family how I was wrong. It was very refreshing to see a guy with a big long beard telling me I was just as good as he was. I wasn't sure I believed it, but it was very nice to hear. And that non-judgmental approach is what took me and my family to Chabad. My wife's a convert. She's from South America. She's black. When we tried to find a synagogue, the story's interesting. My daughter was born, and at about 2 years old, my wife said to me, we should find a community. I mean, we were close to my mother's, my brothers, but in a very distant kind of way. And she said, we have to have some kind of community because right now we're not connected to anything. And she said, I'm a convert. I don't really know much. I'm tasking you to find us a synagogue. I said, really? Things are pretty good the way they are. And she said, no, I really think we need a community. I said, okay, nothing religious. I'll find something. It can't be religious. I don't want none of this religious stuff. I don't want any rules and laws. I spent my whole life running away from that. We found no place that felt like home until we came to Chabad. A couple of places were actually a bit racist, but that was the certain characters there. My wife didn't like when we would sit together in a synagogue. We went to Reform, Reconstructions, different places men and women sit together. And she said, it doesn't feel right. I actually honestly often think that the reason she said that was because she just didn't want to sit next to me. So this was her way of telling me, you go there, I'm going over here. Okay? But it was much more than that. It was a warm, embracing place, as I know you found being here, right off the bat. And there was no judgment, and there was no fake no judgment. You know, there's always the fake no judgment, right? I'm not judging you, but of course I'm judging you. You know it, I know it, I'm just pretending I'm not. And you're pretending to go along with it. The reality is, if you look at the shluchim, like the folks here, you see there's no judgment. There's zero judgment. No one is any better than anybody else. This appealed to me from where I was coming from the family I created, but it also appealed to me because that's what good psychologists are. They're non-judgmental. Often when I give a talk, people ask me questions and they start like, I have a friend who has a problem.
They're talking about them.
And of course they're always talking about themselves. And every time I talk, I say, I'm not actually talking to you, I'm talking about myself. We all have emotional health issues. One of the things that keeps people from getting help is stigma and their own self-judgment. I should be able to do this, I should be better than this, I should be stronger than this. Somehow if it's mental, we don't treat it the same way we do physical. But we all have emotional problems. COVID pointed this up maximally. And none of us should judge anybody else. So a big part of my practice, I was on the radio for many, many years, was just to tell everybody, you're not alone. There are, 25, 30 people in this room, I can't count. A third have anxiety, diagnosable anxiety. A fifth have diagnosable depression. And that's just in this slice of a moment. You take this, over the lifespan, all of us will go through a mental health crisis. Each and every one of us. So part of my message today is not only to give you this amazing tip on how to handle anxiety and depression and stress, but also to tell you to not feel bad if you're suffering. Only about a third of people who have mental health needs seek out therapy. Okay, so that's my other message tonight, which is if you do have something going on, or if you know someone who has something going on, reach out to a professional. Because all of this stuff is curable. By the way, if you go, I'm going to go all over the place here. But if you go on the internet and you Google anxiety, you'll come across a lot of sites that will tell you that anxiety is something you have to learn to live with. You'll have it your whole life. All you can do is manage it. It's baloney. Anxiety is curable. Now, we all have anxiety as part of being a human being. You know, I couldn't find this place. I got a little nervous. There's normal anxieties that go on. But we all have the capacity to take the more severe anxieties and bring them back down to a normal level. Depression too, sadness, things happen, we get sad. Stress, when I first opened up my practice, I called it the stress center. It's kind of an odd name if you think about it. People used to go, am I supposed to go there to get stressed? Of course not. Maybe I should have called it the de-stress center, but the whole reason I used the word stress was because everybody can admit to being stressed. It's harder for people to admit to being anxious or depressed. So only about a third of people get help. That means 2/3 of people need help and aren't getting any. So if the only message you take out of tonight is, maybe I should speak to a psychologist, or maybe I should get my friend to speak to a psychologist, that would be great in and of itself. The Tanya, our Rebbe, created a movement, and the reason that's why it's so amazing now, and it grows all the time, and there are shluchim in every country in the world, and people gravitate. I would never have become religious again if it wasn't for Chabad and Lubavitch. It's impossible. I was so anti, it was impossible. But here was a group that came and said, you're one of us. And I guess I was looking finally to find a place where no one was going to judge me, my choices, or anything else. I found it here. That's the type of therapy you want to look for as well. So no judgment, only love. And that's why I do my practice. And my radio show, even though you're talking to people and there's a microphone and you never see any of these people, I always try to talk as if I was actually talking to someone. And people used to tell me, it comes across like you really care. And I said, it's not a party trick. You want to find a therapist that really cares. The Rebbe, his shluchim, they really care. You already know that. So for me, believing that you can have a roadmap to mental health, it made sense you can have a roadmap to spiritual health. To me, who thought every human being is the same and shouldn't be judged one way or the other, to find a movement that was truly non-judgmental, and honestly, I don't think I've ever found it anywhere else. In any other movement. I'm a student of religions a little bit, and I have patients from all walks of life. I don't see it anywhere else. And it's so important for your emotional well-being to not judge, and particularly to not judge yourself. So it appealed to me in that way too. Plus I have this very precocious daughter who at 8 years old was already becoming religious. I think she took after my mother, her grandmother, and she pushed us along this journey. It took a while. And that's the other thing that struck me, is to evolve yourself spiritually is exactly the same as evolving yourself mentally, emotionally. You got to work on yourself. So the tools I'm going to give you, and I'm going to start giving them right now, are things you can work on. Okay? In fact, I'm going to start it, I don't even know what time it is, I'm going to start it by giving you, okay, thank you. How long am I supposed to talk to?
As long as you want. Yeah.
You didn't change the time.
Okay.
Ben,
How do you know, first of all, the first question is, how do you know if you're not doing well? Pretty obvious, no?
Because you don't feel well.
Because you don't feel well, exactly. Because you're nervous all the time. You're worried all the time. I'm not even asking for a show of hands, but I am sure most hands would go up if I say, are you feeling stressed in life these days?
No,
Me? I am. Do you sometimes get nervous, or you're worrying a lot? Are you worrying a lot about your kids, your parents, your job, your future, health? Everybody is. So you don't actually have to reach clinical levels of anxiety or depression or stress to use these tips I'm going to give you. In fact, you want to use them all the time right away,